It's election day in America, and right here in Yucaipa, big issues will be decided at the ballot box that will shape the future of this small town USA for generations to come. Welcome to episode number 5 of the Yucaipa 360 podcast, Election Day. Welcome to Yucaipa 360, episode number 5. It is Election Day, a big day for our nation, and right here in the city of Yucaipa as well. Nationally, you may have heard there's a presidential race going on right now. Also, a couple of U.S. Senate seats and House of Representative seats. At the state level, we've got state Senate seats. You may have heard state Assembly seats up this year as well, and a number of statewide propositions. And right here in Yucaipa, we have 2 city council contests. We have a recall on the ballot, and we have a sales tax measure, Measure S. So it is a much larger election cycle than usual for us here in Yucaipa. But the focus of this episode is not the specifics of what's on the ballot this year. It is to break down the election process itself. And to help us do that, from the political viewpoint, from the perspective of a candidate and an elected official, we are honored to have with us State Assembly Member Greg Wallis. Greg represents the 47th District in the State Assembly, and that includes the city of Yucaipa. Welcome, Greg.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate you having me on. Happy to be here in Yucaipa.
Very, very happy to have you. And to help us walk through the process from the government side of the equation, we have Yucaipa City Clerk Anna Sauseda, who serves as the city's election official. Welcome, Anna.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Yeah. Greg, let's start from the beginning of your journey to the State Assembly. You've had kind of an unconventional path, right?
I think that's fair.
Yeah, I think, and as someone who has also had an unconventional path to where they are, I really appreciate that. But, really, when you look at who is serving in what we consider higher office, which, state Senate, state Assembly, Congress, I would say the vast majority of the people in those positions have served in lower elected office before, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, your predecessor, Chad Mays, had been on the town council in Yucca Valley. I think had served, 2 stints as mayor there while he was on that council. Mm-hmm. Although not an elected position, he was chief of staff for county supervisor, which is a, very high position in local government, and then ran for state assembly successfully from there. Senator Ochoa Bogue, who represents Yucaipa, she was on local school board, and then ran for state senate from there. So it's really, impressive that you were able to, your very first run for elected office, run for state assembly, and do so successfully. Maybe lead us through that. What led you to the decision to run for state assembly? The decision to be a candidate in the first place.
Yeah, well, I grew up playing sports, so I'm a competitive guy, and that was my dad and I's hobby. We would, go in the backyard, hit baseballs, throw the football around. My mom and I, we did politics. That was sort of our thing, and so I always used to joke that I listened to way too much Rush Limbaugh growing up when I was getting picked up from school. So I went down to California Lutheran University for school, studied political science, got involved with the Young Republican Club there, College Republicans, and got involved with some campaigns out that way. Made my way out to actually live out in Bermuda Dunes. It was about 12 years ago. Moved out there to run a congressional race for a guy named Brian Nestandi.
Mm-hmm.
Brian was in the assembly prior to Chad. And then I worked in Chad's district office, Mace's district office, for 8 years. And when he decided he wasn't running again, my wife and I were frustrated with the direction of California. And, we had a conversation, and we've always been raised with this sort of idea that if you have the opportunity and ability to serve, you have a responsibility to offer yourself up for service. Mm. And we were looking around, and it wasn't looking like there was anyone else that was willing to run for this seat. Too many of our friends and family members were leaving the state of California for lack of opportunity. And so we said, hey, let's put our name on the ballot and give this thing a shot. And we ended up pulling it off by 85 votes out of 170,000. So it was quite the experience.
That's incredible. We had a city council race here 2 years ago that I think was maybe 63 votes what it ended up being decided by. But that's in one district in one city, right?
Yeah.
And you were what, 80 some votes.
85.
That's
Wow.
that's incredible.
They said it was the third closest race in the history of the legislature. So yeah,
In the history of the legislature.
as far as they go back and have data, I guess.
Wow, that's how long did it take to get those results? I mean, that close, it was probably weeks after the election.
Yeah, it was exactly a month. So election day was November 8th. You had 30 days to certify the election.
Mhm.
They actually do swearing in for the state legislature before they certify the ballots. So December 5th, 2022, they swore 79 members of the assembly in, and we were still down here counting ballots. I was only up by 30 votes on the 5th, but December 8th, they certified the election. We were up by 85, and the Speaker of the Assembly called me and he said, "Hey, I'm not paying for a recount. Go ahead and get yourself sworn in." I had no idea how to do that, but we figured it out, and been up there the last 2 years.
Okay, so you're going to California Lutheran University in Thousand Oaks.
Mhm.
You're a poli-sci major, so that would tell me that you had some interest in politics, going in. How young in life was it that you realized at some point you wanted to run for office? I mean, we have a picture. Let's put would this guy have known that?
That's a good picture.
Yeah, right. Is that your high school senior picture? What is that?
I think that's in college.
Is it?
Pretty sure that's in college.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, you look exactly the same.
Yeah,
For what it's worth.
few more lines and wrinkles now.
Yeah.
Actually, all right. So the earliest I can remember getting involved in politics was the year 2000, and my dad. You remember those big rolls of butcher paper? You could you kind of go to the art store, and we rolled out a couple of those, and we traced the big map, and we were sitting there coloring in the states as they were getting called by the TV stations, and so. My mom used to bring me into the voting booth, and you've got your "I voted" sticker on, and so I just remember being raised with that sort of community engagement. But I think it kind of goes hand in hand with sports. It's competitive, it's fun, but this actually has some real meaningful impact on the quality of lives of our communities. And so, I don't know if I'd say I ever wanted to run for office, but I've always liked the idea of working in government and trying to help people.
That's good because, we've got a budget deficit around here, and you said you've got like a heart for service. We could use some volunteer work in City Hall.
I love it.
Okay. But I mean, I want to really drill down. So you go to college, you're working on some campaigns. Like there comes a moment where you have to decide, I'm running for office, right? I want to hear about that decision process for you. So, you mentioned former Assemblyman Brian Nastandy, who worked for Congress. I know you went and you worked on his campaign, and unfortunately for Brian, that didn't work out. But you went right from there to working for then newly elected State Assembly Member Chad Mays, right, in his district office. Right. So how long did you work for Chad?
For 8 years.
For 8 years.
8 years.
Okay, so you're working for Chad. You're in the district office. Chad decides after coming up on 8 years that he's not going to run again.
Right.
And what was that process like? You deciding that, okay, I'm going to throw my hat in this.
Well, I mean, first thing I did was call my wife, obviously, and I said, "What do you think about it?" And when she said, "Well, let's see where this goes," we started making phone calls. Called Brian, called Chad. I think I even called you, Chris.
Probably so.
I think so.
But you did it anyway.
Just sort of, yeah, I know. And they all said no, so here we are. No, I don't know, man. It seems like California could use some different ideas, fresh perspective, new leadership, and we absolutely need balance. I've obviously had the experience working on the staff side of government to where I felt like I was able to go out there and get the job done, at least from the governing perspective. But running the campaign, I've run a lot of campaigns, but never being the face of the name. The biggest hesitation is obviously how negative this all gets. I mean, I don't know if any of your listeners have been seeing my race, but there's been quite a bit of money spent. And
Greg, I got to tell you, it's obnoxious. So I live here in Yucaipa, so I'm in your district. Yeah. Yesterday, Monday, I go, and this is a week out of the election because we're filming this on what is today, the 29th, a week before the election. I go to my mailbox on Monday. There are 5 pieces of mail just in your race.
There were 7 in some people's yesterday.
Is that right?
Race. Yeah.
I mean, my gosh, that's, there are other races going on. People are getting, people want their mail to be, looked at.
It's ridiculous. I don't know what to tell you about it. I mean, when you win by 85 votes, it's got to be obviously the top targeted race on both sides in the state. And your campaign's doing a lot of this. Your opponent's campaign's doing a lot of this. And then you've got these independent expenditure groups. And, that's absolutely surprising to us just as much as anyone else.
That's what most of it is, really. And the average voter doesn't pay attention to the little box at the top that says paid for by, right? They attribute it all to the candidate, for better or worse, right? You as the candidate, you get blamed for it all, whether you had a hand in it or not.
Yeah, exactly. No, I get why are you saying mean things? I'm like, I didn't even say that. Okay. I mean, it's true, but I didn't say it.
Right. Well, let's go back. So you're working in the district office for then Assembly member Chad Mays. He's not going to run. There must have been a lot of speculation at that point. Okay, who's positioning to run? Who's going to run? You're a young guy at that point. You still are, but how old were you at that point?
32.
32. Okay. Yeah. So, you had a lot of opportunities of what direction to go in your career, right? At that point.
Mm-hmm.
And what makes someone look at that and say, especially as a Republican in a state where Republicans are in the super minority, right?
Yeah.
Having the legislative experience that you had working in a state legislator's office, you could have written your own ticket probably in any number of lines of work and made more money than you're making now, right? And you're evaluating career option. What makes you say this is the right thing for me?
I mean, for us, really, it was, and I'll tell you, our really good friends, Michael and Clarice Bozick, my wife and I, absolutely love them. And they decided they were moving out of the state. They were moving to Scottsdale, Arizona, just because California was going too far in one direction. There was a lack of opportunity. They just had their first kid. Baby number 2 was on the way, and they just didn't envision a future in California, being able to raise the family the way they want to. And we just felt that my wife and I really just felt that was such a shame, because we love this state, absolutely love California. There's no place I would rather live in the entire world than right here. And I think a lot of people feel that way. Yeah. Our only downside here is the 120 people up in Sacramento are making bad decisions. So we felt like, hey, let's go try and, swing that pendulum back in the right direction. Maybe it'll inspire more folks to get involved, and we can get some more balance here.
Yeah. And you really have, in a little bit, I want to talk about the approach you've taken, because it's very different than what a lot of people do once they get to Sacramento. I think, your constituents should probably appreciate that approach. You're working to represent them more so than just an ideology, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you've decided you're going to run. You're gearing up. Meanwhile, on the government side, preparations are being made for the counties and the cities to run hopefully smooth election processes, right? And I want you to delve in to what that process looks like. But first, talk a little bit about what a city clerk is. So here in Yucaipa, you're the city clerk, but that's just one of the hats that you wear, right? You're also the director of general services. General services includes IT, solid waste, our mobile home rent stabilization program, and other duties, including the office of the city clerk. But let's focus on those clerk functions. As a city clerk, what are your major responsibilities?
So I'm the elections official for the city. I'm responsible for public records requests. I'm responsible for just ensuring transparency for the city, making sure that our residents have access to all of our records, all of our historical documents, agendas for city council, things like that.
Okay. All right. How did you get to be where? How did you become the city clerk? What does that career path look like?
So I started working in customer service for the city of Colton, and didn't really know what the city clerk's office did, but I was, I think, 9.5 years into customer service. And
what year did you start?
2006.
Okay, so you've been in local government a long time.
Yeah, a long time. So, I had decided it was 9.5 years, and I decided that I needed something different. I didn't want to do customer service for the rest of my life. And there was a position that opened up in the city clerk's office in the city of Colton, and I went for it. It was an office specialist position, and the moment I got there, I just kind of fell in love with the city clerk's office and everything that they did, and their interactions with the city council and working with the city manager, and just seeing everything, all the behind the scenes. It really spoke to me. And so, I just kind of started learning and working my way up, and here I am.
Wow, fantastic. So is one of the requirements to be a city clerk that at least once in a while your birthday falls on election day? Is it, we like to embarrass people. We have a birthday photo of you
Oh,
here.
geez.
This is Anna at one of her past birthdays. So yeah, this episode airs or drops on election day, November 5th, which is your birthday. So happy birthday.
Thank
Happy
you.
birthday.
Thank you.
Are you wearing that outfit?
I will wear this outfit. I'm sure the voters will appreciate this.
Yes. Hard to miss anyway. So, ordinarily I'd ask, if your husband's planning something nice for you for your birthday, but I know you well enough to know that you would much rather be planning something with Brett Favre or Aaron Rodgers. For those of you who don't know, Anna is a huge Green Bay Packers fan. I mean, really to ridiculous levels. In fact, if you were to ever go into Anna's office here at City Hall, you look around and there are no pictures of her husband, her children, but let's look at one picture of Anna's office here. This is a wall in Anna's office. Brett Favre on the left, Aaron Rodgers on the right. No pictures of family, no husband. She has 2 sons. No signs of them there. Let's look at another picture here. Okay, so here's a 2-sided frame. On the left is Anna, just Anna, no family.
At Lambeau Field, by the way.
Right, okay.
Touching the grass at Lambeau Field.
And then Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers. No family. The only other picture frame in her office, let's take a look at that. What in the world is this? This is just, I think this is the picture that came with the frame.
It is the picture that came with the frame. I have not gotten around to swapping out the picture.
Okay, well.
Is it going to be Jordan Love?
Definitely not. Absolutely not. I've not jumped on the Jordan Love bandwagon yet.
No, I'm not sure what to make of all this, but let's get back to your official role as the elections official.
Yeah.
Give us an overview from the government side, from the city clerk's office side and or a county registrar's office side, what that process looks like, from start to finish, from advertising for candidates to run to certification of the election on the end.
Yeah, so we work closely with the county registrar's office. The county registrar, San Bernardino County Registrar, they run the election primarily. We here in Yucaipa, me as a city clerk, I'm facilitating the process for the candidates. So very early on in the year, I would say maybe February or so, I start looking at all the different, resolutions we have to call for the election. We have to adopt a resolution where we consolidate or request that the county consolidates. We adopt a resolution setting requirements for candidate statements. Those are the 3 things that you do initially to just kind of start the process. Once those get adopted, you send those to the registrar's office. That lets them know that, hey, we're having an election here in Yucaipa. We'd like to work with you. And that really just kind of kicks off the process. Once you take care of those resolutions, it's really just a matter of following the elections code. There's very specific dates when you need to publish. You have to publish in certain languages. You have to run it, X amount of times in the newspaper of general circulation. So just very specific things that's outlined in the elections code that you have to follow. So once we publish the notices, there's a nomination period that opens up that happens in July. The nomination period started July 15th. It goes into August. Depending on whether incumbents run or not, it may get extended. And during this nomination period, that's when the candidates come in, they meet with me, I issue them their paperwork. They essentially it's them letting us know that they're signing up, that they want to run for office.
And from the candidate side, running for state office, I guess you do that at the county registrar. Do you have to go to, your district is more than one county.
Yeah.
Do you have to go to both registrars?
So you pull your paperwork in the county in which you reside.
Okay.
But if you want to put a ballot statement or a candidate statement on there, then you have to go submit that to each individual county.
Okay. All right. So what's that process as a candidate going? You have to personally go in to the registrar's office and sign all the paperwork.
Yeah, you can send someone down there to pull the paperwork for you as long as you have a letter saying that it was you who requested that. But then you have to actually go down there, and after you get your signatures and fill out all the information, you go down there, you turn it in, you do a little swearing in thing, basically agreeing to the rules, and then you're on the ballot. Well, I guess they verify your signatures and then you're on the ballot.
They do.
Right. Yeah. And there are a lot of rules for things like candidate statements, how many words, and what can and cannot be included, etc.
And actually, interestingly enough, I don't have one this cycle. There's not going to be one on either side in my race because you have to voluntarily accept contribution limits. Basically, you're going to say you're not going to spend more than, I think it's like $1.3 million. And in my race, both sides are spending more than that. So we don't get to actually put those in there.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah.
More than $1.3 million on each side for a state assembly race.
I think we're at $7 million spend as of today. Yeah.
Wow.
Does that include the primary?
No.
Really? Just the general election cycle, over $7 million.
All that mail's expensive, man.
It really is, and it's gotten more expensive.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. That's incredible. I mean, I remember when state legislative races were $150,000. You came in with $100,000, you're probably going to win.
Yeah.
It really wasn't all that long ago.
I wish.
Wow. Now you got city council candidates raising that kind of money.
You do.
Yeah. Crazy.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So Anna, what are some of the common misconceptions about city clerk? What are some of the kind of common issues and complaints that you hear from candidates and the public?
So one of the biggest things when the candidates first come in, we put together this candidate handbook, and it gives them all the information that they need to run, right? It gives them all the dates, all the paperwork, it gives them everything. But the very first page in this handbook is explaining to them that we are not providing legal advice, right? We are not guiding them in any one direction. If they have legal questions, they should hire an attorney. They should really be doing their due diligence, but it's definitely not going to be coming from the city clerk's office. That's one of the things we get a lot. We get asked for advice. There are forms that you have to fill out along the way, campaign finances, things that you have to disclose. We get a lot of questions, a lot of requests for advice on how to fill out these forms. We just refer them to the correct agency.
Which is, I assume, the Fair Political Practices Commission.
Yes.
Yeah, or a campaign consultant.
Yes.
Or treasurer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But that's probably one of the bigger ones, is just asking for, advice on how to fill that out. Or
do you get a lot of pushback? Because, I mean, one of the things you have to do is make sure you're enforcing the election code in a lot of different ways. But, specific to filing, the election code specifies what can and cannot be included in ballot designations, which is, the title that someone can use under their name on the ballot, and in candidate statements. And I bet you get a lot of, when you have to tell someone, no, this doesn't meet the requirements, I bet you get a lot of pushback.
Yeah, definitely. We had one candidate this cycle where, we had to push back a little bit, but really you just refer back to the elections code. It's pretty specific. It's up for interpretation. My take on how I'm reading your ballot designation. Usually we can talk through it with the candidates, though, and we can come to an understanding. And
if someone disagrees with your interpretation, what's the remedy?
They have to file a writ. They have to challenge me. Ultimately, it's my decision, and they would have to challenge me.
Okay. All right. So Greg, you've decided you're going to run. You go, you pull papers. Let's talk about the campaign process. I mean, and specifically, what was your experience in the campaign process? You're first time running for office. You've worked in campaigns before, but now you're the candidate. It's got to be a very different feeling.
Very different,
right? What was that process from the time that you pulled papers and you filed and you head out the gate? What happened?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing you want to do is go and line up a bunch of endorsements, supporters, other people in the community who are well known. When you look at an assembly district, the 47th, we have 14 cities. We go from, La Quinta to Yucaipa. We actually go into East Redlands, up into Yucca Valley, down into East Hemet. And so you want to make sure you're reaching out to sort of all, I view my district more in quadrants, but all areas of the district. Get people who are on local elected councils, school boards, water boards, things like that, to lend their name to your campaign. You got to build this team, if you will. We talked about this a little bit earlier. Money, obviously, it's very expensive. There are campaign contribution limits. So when you're raising money with, I think it was $4,700 was the contribution limit when I first ran. And you got to raise a couple $1 million, $4,700 at a time, and you're not going to get that from everyone. A lot of times it's $100 here, $250 there.
Right.
You spend a lot of time on the phones, calling people, putting events together. You got to hire all the people we just talked about. You need a treasurer to make sure you're legally in compliance with all the finance stuff. You got to have a consultant, get your website up there. build your platform and go out there and bring that to the voters and your future voters. So it is a 24/7 sort of job.
I bet. And, I'm sure your experience in this cycle must have been very different from 2 years ago when you first ran, because now you're running as an incumbent. You have established relationships in Sacramento, a voting record. They call it the third house, which is, the different groups that, represent different industries in Sacramento that, supply a lot of campaign cash. But when you're not incumbent, how hard is it to convince people that, like, you've got an incumbent who's not running for reelection. You got probably, a field of at least a half dozen or so very interested candidates who are going to run. How do you convince people that you're the one that they need to support?
I mean, typically you outraise them, right?
Right.
That speaks volumes. I remember the first week after decided running, I was just on the phone calling everyone I knew, friends, family, whoever actually really likes you.
Yeah. And that didn't take very long, did it?
Yeah. I mean, we raised $100,000 in the first week, which I think was, that was pretty significant.
$100,000 in a week.
Yeah.
That's good.
And it was from a lot of folks who'd never made a political contribution in their life. Right. And,
Really?
and I think you find that often with first time candidates.
Mm.
You're not going to be able to tap into sort of the typical donors and the folks who normally fund these races. You're just going to your friends, family, neighbors, people, and saying, hey, I think I can do this job. I know that we have a shared vision for the future of this state. Would you be willing to invest in this, invest in me? And you'll be surprised how many people say yes, and then they have no idea how to do it because they've never written a check like that before. But
wow. So you start raising money.
Yeah.
At what point do you start putting the team together? You got to go find someone to be your general campaign consultant, someone who's going to write the mail and help you lay out strategy. And, you got to find someone who's going to be a campaign manager on the ground and help you, organize the ground game. And what is that process like?
Yeah, so that was probably our first 2 weeks. We wanted to kind of have that team put together for a state legislative race anyway. You also need to convince the state party that you're the candidate to be that party's nominee. And so the first thing they're going to ask you, whether it's the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, they're going to say, hey, who's your team, right? We want to make sure you're working with serious people. Who's your general consultant? Who's your treasurer? Who's going to be running the ground program, the field operations? So you got to get that done right away. There's, a handful of consultants throughout the state that we, had them submit proposals, did interviews via Zoom, and ended up working with a guy that we've known for a long time, had a good relationship with him from the Brian Estandi campaign, actually.
Mm-hmm.
So we got Dwayne on board and went and met with, at the time, I think the Republican leader of the Assembly was Marie Waldron. Drove out to her district down in San Diego, had a sit down with Marie, kind of laid out our campaign plans and how we thought we could get it done. And then, the next step is you want to go get your county and state party endorsement. So you go to both, because I have two counties. You have to go to Riverside County and then San Bernardino County, and you go interview with their central committees. And if you get their endorsements, then you're eligible for the state party endorsement, which is, really important in a primary,
Sure.
Especially with an open seat like this, where really, like you said, anyone could jump in. That was important for us too.
And as you're making the rounds with these meetings and phone calls, are you hearing just over and over again, we'll see how much money you raise?
Yep, that's pretty much what they say.
Yeah. I remember when Chad Mays ran the first time. He was chief of staff or county supervisor at that time. And he had to, for most of the campaign up until I think the very end, he had to continue working his full-time job. He couldn't take a leave of absence for a year,
Right.
He was getting flack from, because the district has, what you said, 14 cities in it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he was getting some criticism for not showing up to every event in every city. And I remember his response. I thought this was very wise. He said, I had to decide early on if the time that I had that I could spend on the campaign, if I was going to spend that time trying to go to every group's meeting where typically you see the same people over and over again, right? Or if I was going to spend that time raising money.
Mm-hmm.
And he spent that time raising money. And the reporting period that was almost a year before the primary, he reported over $100,000, and that really helped to clear the field. That he was the first one to hit that $100,000 mark,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what did it, I think.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, and when I was first running, I was working for the state legislature, and so I had the 9-to-5 job. I couldn't do anything to help my efforts. And in fact, I had to recuse myself from going to any events in the district because it would have been a perceived conflict. So
Oh, interesting.
I couldn't even go to my normal, regular community meetings. And so that was a criticism that I've received as well. And it actually, I don't mind getting it. It makes you feel good when people are saying, hey, we'd like to see you more. It's better than the alternative.
Right.
But you have to kind of make that decision. And ultimately, if you want to be successful, you're not going to be able to run a campaign unless you can have the resources to get your message out and communicate to voters. And when we're talking about a state assembly race, in a primary, it was 170,000. This time we expect it to be 250,000 voters we're trying to talk to. And
Wow.
It's expensive.
So how much does it? So if you're gonna send a piece of mail to your whole district, Republicans and Democrats, likely voters, what's the price tag of one mail piece?
I don't know. I couldn't afford that. We target mail. It's about 55,000 every time we send a mailer.
Oh my gosh!
Wow.
For one piece of mail, 55. Yeah. So I got 5 pieces of mail in my mailbox one day.
And people do some smaller targeting, and I don't know what all these other groups are doing, but if you wanted to go to like a high propensity voters district wide, you're looking at 55,000 would be my guess.
I think this is so important for people to hear, because I think a lot of times, people watch TV or movies and they think they know what it's like to be a candidate, what it's like to run for higher office, and they think, well, I'm going to run for Congress, right?
Yeah.
Gosh darn it, I've got the right ideas. I'm qualified, so I'm going to win, and it just doesn't work like that.
Unfortunately not. Yeah, there's a lot of team building, a lot of relationship building, and really you got to be able to put the resources together to get those ideas out there, to make sure you're sharing that. And look, the people who decide elections, really, it's the declined estates, it's the folks in the middle, right?
In a partisan race.
Yeah, in a partisan race. But often it's folks who maybe aren't super engaged all the time in elections, and so you're selling them something they don't want to buy. So not only can you just hit them with your great ideas, but you kind of have to do it time and time and time again to get them to pay attention to you.
Yeah. Interesting. How has this shift towards vote by mail affected campaigning? Because I think voting by mail came on the scene, and at first a small percentage of voters did it, and that percentage kind of grew slowly every election cycle. And then COVID hit, and all of a sudden the state decides, look, we're gonna mail ballots to every single registered voter, right? In my mind, that has to have drastically increased the cost of running a race, because now your target date isn't election day alone. You're not building up to, you don't have up until election day to convince the majority of voters. You got to be in the mail earlier, and then once you start, you got to keep it up, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's been fascinating. There's a lot of things that have changed with vote by mail. We used to say election day, right? Now we're talking about election month.
Right.
So we have to start Labor Day, be on TV, radio, mail. I will say, if you do not like getting my mail, as soon as you turn that ballot in, I will pull you off my list, and you don't have to get it anymore.
I need to start voting earlier.
You're gonna have to start voting earlier.
Man.
But yeah, no, absolutely. That's correct. One of the things that was fascinating for us last cycle that I had no idea about was the after the election, ballot curing. I had never even heard of ballot
curing. This
ballot
is a new
curing.
one for me.
So basically what happens is, if the signature on your ballot that you turn back in on that little envelope doesn't match the signature that's on file, they put your ballot to the side. And, I used to think, oh my gosh, like that's ridiculous. We shouldn't do things that way. If the signature doesn't match, that's not a real ballot. But when we switched to this all vote by mail ballot election, we had people who hadn't updated their signature with the county registrar of voters or with the DMV in decades. And so there were probably 2,000 ballots that needed curing in my race after the election. And so what happens is the county registrar of voters will go out and send you a cure form. It's an affidavit saying, yes, I attest that was me who submitted my ballot. And then they'll take that signature and they'll check the signature on the ballot, and they'll go, oh, okay, those match up. We can process this ballot and go ahead and process it. So we cured 600 ballots in my race. I won by 85 votes. We had teams of 50 people on the ground every day from November 8th to December 8th, knocking on doors. We were adding people on Instagram, LinkedIn. I remember one story. We had a volunteer who convinced a high school security officer to drive her to a teacher's classroom to get the ballot cured. The first door I knocked on, and again, I'm skeptical of this whole thing. I hadn't done this before. I hadn't even heard of it.
Mm-hmm.
First door I knock on, nice lady opens the door and she goes, "Oh, you're Greg Wallis." And I'm like, "Yeah." And she goes, "I voted for you." I'm like, "Well, that's why I'm here. I actually need you to sign this piece of paper that says it was you who voted."
Wow.
And she's like, "Well, I wanted to understand more about it." And, sure enough, there was a health condition that she had recently developed. Her signature had gotten shakier, but it really was her who voted.
So help me understand this. So 600 ballots that need to be cured,
Yeah.
right? The registrar just hands those names over to you, over to each campaign, or how do you get that list of?
Yeah. You reach out to the registrars.
And the registrar doesn't do the reaching out. You have to do it?
So they will send you something in the mail,
Mhm.
just to the voter directly.
Okay.
But it doesn't, I mean, man, we've been hitting you with campaign mail for a month and a half now.
Right.
People don't want to see this stuff.
I'm sorry, Greg. I'm ignoring your mail at this point.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I get it. I get it. I'm sure a lot of people are. But they'll send you something, and it's sort of just like a benign government envelope, and you've already voted, so you're not necessarily going to be looking for some sort of confirmation receipt. Now, you can go check online at either county, the Registrar of Voters, or the Secretary of State's website to make sure that your ballot was counted.
Okay. I got an email today saying
yeah.
we received your ballot.
Yeah, but not everybody does that.
Okay.
And so anyway, they'll send you something in the mail, and it'll have that affidavit in it. Now, if that doesn't get turned back in, the campaigns can go to the registrars, get the list, and then we can actually go to your house, knock on the door, and bring another copy of that affidavit and get it signed for you.
Interesting. And then you just deliver it to the registrar.
Yeah.
Fascinating. I bet most people have no clue about this. Do people's signatures really change that much over time?
Oh, yeah.
Really? Interesting. So, Anna, from the city clerk side, how has the drastic increase in vote by mail affected operations for the city clerk's office and for registrars?
I can't speak for the registrar. Just kind of looking at their numbers and their percentages, I know that, there was a big spike, obviously, during COVID. It's declined a little bit in the last election, and so we'll see how the numbers turn out this time around. I don't know. I think voting by mail is interesting. I think a lot of people are kind of, they don't really trust the process, and so it's interesting to me to see, what those numbers look like. The turnout actually ends up being just because people don't trust the process.
That's true. A lot of people are very worried about voter fraud now, and it's interesting. It used to be that Republicans voted by mail in higher numbers than Democrats, and I feel like that may have shifted in the last few years. That I feel like Republicans are now wanting to walk those ballots in and hand deliver them because they're not trusting the system. They're not trusting the post office, or they're just afraid that there's too much opportunity for fraud.
Yeah, I had a resident that I spoke to just a couple weeks ago, and she mentioned, she had received her ballot, but she very specifically wants to vote on election day, and she wants to vote at the polling place, but she wouldn't even open her ballot. Like, she didn't want to touch it because she just said, I don't want to open this thing. And then now all of a sudden they're saying, well, you can't have another ballot because you opened this one. So she was very just, untrusting of the process. And so
interesting.
It's very interesting.
All right. So you're sending mail, you're campaigning. I assume you're going door to door where someone is, right?
A lot of people are.
A lot of people
I
are.
mean, me included, but we've got a team of volunteers as well.
Okay. You live in the Coachella Valley. That's a big part of your district. They have their own media market out there. So that means you get to do TV and radio. Here, we're part of the larger LA media market. So it's very expensive and not very targeted, but I assume you're on TV and radio out in the desert.
Yeah, we do some cable over here on the west side of the district. And then what campaigns are switching to now, it's called OTT, stands for over the top. So it's basically the ads you get if you're watching TV on a streaming service.
Okay. Interesting.
And that's super targeted. Okay. So if you were like a, 4 out of 4 Republican household always voted, you're probably not going to hear from many people. But if you're an independent or declined to state voter, both campaigns know that, and they can follow you around wherever you go. Doesn't matter. Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. How does that compare cost-wise to, sending a piece of?
It's very affordable. It's a good way to do it, but the problem is, we don't always know that people are paying attention to it, right? I don't know how often you're paying attention to the ads when you're watching TV, but a lot of people. I watch sports, so I get up and I walk out of the room.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Interesting. So would you say that out of, all the campaign activity you do, you're sending mail, walk-in precincts, I assume you're doing digital, you're on these TV ads. Is mail still king when it comes to campaigns?
I believe it is, but it's starting to shift a little bit.
Is
You're
it?
actually starting to see it shift a little bit. And
To what?
I mean, I think digital is becoming king. People are liking that OTT, YouTube ads, and just because you can target it so much better and it's so much more cost effective. Now, you're always going to have to do mail because, I mean, look, at the very least, I got you from your mailbox to your trash can and you're going through it and you've seen my name.
No. I really read like the first, 24 mailers I received in your race, and then it just got to be a bit much. So
I mean, I think we have people who actually will go through the post office trash bins and see what landed, and I think we've seen over 70 in my race. Over 70 pieces of mail.
At about 50,000 or so a piece, maybe.
I mean, I think some of them are more targeted universes, close, but nothing's going to be less than 30,000, 35,000.
Incredible. So of the, I don't know, what'd you say, 7 million or so that's been on this race, what percentage of that would you say would be just mail?
I mean, that's probably going to be like half of it, right?
Wow.
I would think about half of that's going to be mail.
It's always interesting to me, every election cycle, there's so much focus that candidates place on signs, right? Especially in local races, I think. People are very fixated on signs. In my experience, they're actually not very effective. I've noticed you have some signs, but I feel like it hasn't been the cornerstone of the campaign.
Yeah, I mean, signs are great. Again, you should do everything. I mean, you want to put signs out there. You want to be on the radio. You want to do digital. You want to do mail. You need to go actually pound the pavement, knock on doors, talk to people, be at community events. No stone left unturned. But as far as persuading voters, the signs don't do a whole lot for you there.
Yeah. All right. So you've gone through the campaign. Now we're at election day. Today is election day. Let me start with you, Anna. What does election day look like for the city clerk's office?
So typically on election day, I drive around to the polling locations and just kind of check in, make sure that they don't need anything, or just make sure that everything's running smoothly. We have I should say the last few elections, I've hosted a drive-through mail ballot drop-off. And so I've spent my election night outside collecting ballots. The registrar's office comes down about 8:00, picks up the last batch. And so we kind of wait for them to do their thing. So we're usually out about 9:00 or so. But yeah, the last three, this will be my third election doing the drive-through mail ballot.
Okay. So once the registrar comes and picks up the last batch, is that from the city clerk's office perspective, is that pretty much the end of the process?
I think so. I mean, as far as election day, that's the end of the process. Then at that point, obviously we're checking every few hours to see what the results are, and then we're waiting for the registrar to certify the election. They have 30 days, and so we're just kind of waiting at that point to hear from them.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. So from the candidate's perspective, it's election day. As an incumbent in the state assembly or in Congress, you have 2-year cycles. You're just probably perpetually campaigning, right?
There's a little bit of that.
It clearly ramps up as you get closer. But as a first-time candidate, the first time you ran, from the time you first started to election day, how long of a period of time was that? Was that a full year? Was it less than a year?
Probably about 8 months, I want to say.
8 months. That's okay. So, and I have to assume that pretty quickly that dominates your life.
Yeah, it does. Absolutely.
Okay. So you've been working at this, throwing your heart and soul into this thing for 8 months, and now the day is here. What is that day like for a candidate?
I mean, I still vote on election day. So the first thing I do is I go vote, drop my ballot off. And then it's, all hands on deck to get out the vote. I mean, a lot of these things just come out to turn out. I know in California, and I hear this from people all the time, we live in such a, one party dominated state. My vote doesn't really count. My vote doesn't matter. Well, it really does for down ballot races. I understand, there's some things that are going to be fairly one-sided at the top of the ticket, but, coming from winning by 85 votes, I'll tell you, your vote does matter. Every single one does. So we're out there just trying to get people to the polls in any way we can. We'll send out a blast text reminder to our universe. We'll go out there and we'll have phone banks calling people, offering to get them rides to the polls, offering to pick up their mail ballot if they'd like that. But, that's kind of all hands on deck. Make sure this is the deadline. Get those ballots in. We've been working for 8 months to try and earn your vote. Please get it in today.
Interesting, because I think a lot of people would assume that by the time you get to election day, the work's been done, right? The money's been raised, the mail's been sent, the doors have been knocked, and you're just as a candidate sitting there waiting to get the results. But it sounds like a successful campaign anyway. There's a lot more to it than that. You're right up until, I mean, really right up until 8 o'clock when polls
until
close?
8 p.m. I mean, probably about 7:45 is when we'll kind of head to our, results watching party is what I like to call them. But, you get your supporters and your family and you wait for the updates to come in throughout that evening.
Yeah. Wow. And election nights can be very exciting. I feel like, unfortunately, they've become a lot less exciting as it has become more the norm for registrars in these big counties to be kind of overwhelmed with the number of ballots, and it takes a very long time. Usually you get that first update, which is kind of what the ballots that came in early up until a certain date. And those results post not long after 8 o'clock usually. And then, it might be an hour or two before you get the next update, an hour or two before you get the next update, before you know it, it's 1 o'clock in the morning, and you still don't know where you are.
So, we have access to the data through like PDI or GOP data center, whatever it is, that tells you sort of the partisan breakdown of the ballots that are coming in.
Oh.
And so, for example, when the first results came in November of 2022, I was down probably 10,000 votes, and I was ecstatic.
Down 10,000 votes, and you were excited.
Yeah, because I knew that there were 13,000 more Democrat ballots that had been submitted, and that was the early count. And so we were sitting there going, we're actually going to have a chance at this thing. Now, everyone in the room with me, all of my supporters and family, I think they're like, he's just lost it, right? The guy's gone delusional. But no, I told him, I said, hey, we're going to be, and I remember saying this because I don't know if I actually believed it at the time, but I said, we're going to be lucky if we know the results of this race before Thanksgiving. And sure enough, we didn't know until December 8th.
Wow.
So yeah, election night's less exciting, but
yeah,
fun to watch all month, I guess.
So between election day and certification, when you know for sure, what are you doing?
You're ballot curing.
You're curing, but I mean, is that a full-time job?
It's a full-time job.
Really?
Yeah. We had about 50 people out there every day, and we
50 people ballot curing.
Yeah, but I mean, it could take you 8 hours. It could take you a couple days to just get one of these forms signed.
Wow.
I mean, you're essentially like chasing a stranger around who you've never met in your life, trying to get them to open the door and sign this piece of paper to make sure their ballot counts.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That's pretty intense. So you go through all this, you're battling it out for 8 months the first time. The 47th Assembly District is pretty tight registration-wise, right?
Yeah, I think Democrats have a 6% registration advantage.
Wow. So you had to overcome a 6-point registration disadvantage.
It was 7 last time.
So,
it's gotten better.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh. Interesting.
Yeah.
Why is that?
I don't know. The entire state of California.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Everything's trending that way.
Interesting. Been a long time since that's been the case.
A long time. Yeah, I don't think we ever saw that when I worked for Chad Mays.
I mean, I can't. Ever since I've been involved in government and politics, gone the other way. So that's interesting. So you get to the end, you get to the finish line, and then this happens. Let's put a picture up. Right there. I was there that day. If you're involved in politics long enough, eventually you're going to have a friend or two that gets elected to office and sometimes higher office. And when that happens, you're very happy and you're very proud. And I'm very proud of you, Greg, not just for getting elected, but for the way that you approach the job, which is, in my view, one of a statesman, more so than a politician. You have a reputation for trying to actually get things. I think when people get elected to the state legislature, they have a decision they have to make on the kind of legislator they're going to be. I have seen legislators that take one of two paths. One is, I'm going to be an ideologue. I'm going to be a hero to my party base, but I know that means I'm not going to get anything done. Right.
Yeah.
As a member of the minority party.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. The other path is, I'm going to hold true to my values, but where I can, I'm going to work with the other side. I'm going to reach across the aisle, and I know that's going to make me unpopular with some of the diehards in my party, but I'm here to actually try to get something done. I think that's the approach you've taken.
Yeah, I mean, no, and I remember I was talking to some of our local TV outlets after swearing in, and the reality is you're elected to represent Republicans, Democrats, and independents, and all 500,000 people who make up the 47th Assembly District. That's the job. So just because you've got, an R or a D behind your name, doesn't mean that that's the only people who you're responsible for making sure their voice is heard. And so, when I went up to Sacramento, the first thing I did was join the Problem Solvers Caucus. I think that, good government and a lot of the areas we work in at the state level doesn't really know partisanship. I mean, what's that old saying? Like, there's no Republican or Democrat way to fill a pothole.
Right.
So that's the approach I've tried to take. I hope I hope my constituents appreciate it. I know I've heard from a few who would prefer me to be more ideological, but
well, look, I'm really proud of you. You and I go pretty far back. Actually, I was thinking about it the other day. 2011 is when we met, so that's 13 years. We've done a lot during that time. I'd like to put up a couple pictures because again we like to embarrass people here, but I have to warn you, these pictures get more embarrassing as we go along. So
okay.
So let's start with the first picture here. This is 2013. This is some political event. It was a Gatsby themed dinner, and there's you and in pink there your wife Des and some friends at that event, and that was me pre-beard. And I don't think this picture is all that shocking because I think, your constituents probably expect that you're going to be going to lots of events like this.
That's true.
Yeah. But do your constituents know that once upon a time you drove a motorcycle?
I don't know if they know that.
Right. Now, in your defense, I believe this was a charity ride.
This was, yes.
I think this was Ride to the Flags, which, if I recall, benefits the Wounded Warrior Project.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct. It was. I just remember it being very hot, and it was a really slow ride, but it was for a good cause, so it was worth doing it.
Yeah. Yep. And I did not include a picture of myself here.
I see your Triumph in the background.
Yeah,
though.
that was my first little Triumph, my first foray into riding. I didn't last with that bike very long because I needed a stronger engine because I'm a bigger guy.
Yeah. Well, the real shocker behind this was pretty early on in your motorcycle riding career. And
it was.
And I was working for you when I got mine, and I got an earful from you. I mean, you were just like, what are you doing? That is so dangerous.
Oh, you were going to kill yourself. I was convinced.
And then like a month later, you come rolling into work on that Triumph. And I was like, all right.
You were just having way too much fun, and I had to get in on it. I had FOMO.
I love it.
Okay, so let's look at one more picture here. Now,
oh, great.
This is not Halloween. This is how Greg used to dress. No, this is actually something called the Labyrinth Masquerade Ball in Los Angeles. But I saved the most embarrassing picture for last. This is Greg actually rooting for the Angels.
Oh, man.
Wow.
Right?
Wow.
I'm a big Dodgers fan, but...
well, I don't know. This picture shows differently.
That's true. I think I even bought an Angels jacket I still have.
Wow.
Yes. Yeah.
I think Des got a ball, or we got something happened fun with that one.
Yeah, that sounds familiar. My memory isn't what it once was. Yeah. Well, look, despite your scandalous past of rooting for the Angels, you somehow managed to get yourself elected and were sworn in December 2022. But then you had to actually serve.
Yes.
Right. Which is something I think a lot of people don't stop to think about. I'm going to win this race, and they get elected and like, oh my gosh, I got to serve. There's a famous saying that's one of my favorites, that when someone first gets elected to higher office, whether it's the state legislature or Congress, they get up there and they're in the Capitol and they're looking around at all the members of Congress or the state legislature, and they're kind of in awe.
Mm-hmm.
And they say, man, how did I get it? Right. But then after they're for a little while, not that long, they start looking around and they say, how did they get here? I want to hear about what it was like for you. So you win the race, you get sworn in. Now, was this still in the remnants of COVID? Were things different at this point, or was it still?
No, all restrictions were over at that point.
Okay.
Yeah.
But it took so long to get your results certified. Did that impact your kind of onboarding, or what happens once you get elected?
So typically in probably 75, 76 of the 80 assembly seats, the results on election night, who won the race. And so you go up to Sacramento, and if you're a new member, you do new member orientation. Well, we didn't have the ability to do that. In fact, I never did new member orientation. So every once in a while, if I like break a rule or something, I just say, well, you guys didn't train me. I don't know. Like, you're not supposed to park your pool car there, sir.
I say the same thing all the time. It's all right.
Yeah. So typically you go up and you do a couple of weeks of new member orientation. You'd be meeting with your new colleagues, getting to, it's all about relationships up there. And so you want to start building those relationships right away. You're hiring staff. You're kind of learning who all the lobbyists, players, folks who you're going to be working with throughout the year are. We were down here in the district. We were out here curing ballots, so we didn't have any of that. And then I think it was December 12th is when I actually got sworn in. And so that's already done. Everybody's ready for the holidays. So I had to start figuring out how to put together staff, and I start making phone calls to some folks I know who have experience in the building, and pulled a couple people out of retirement, and we put our team together, and then went up there the first week of January. And you've got your committee assignments, and the first time I walked out on the floor, actually, and I'm looking around, and I'm like, it was really cool. But I also realized I have no idea where my desk is. No one told me where I'm supposed to go.
Isn't your name on it?
Yeah, it is. But there's 80 of them, and I'm just wandering around until they take me to the desk. One of the things that was really interesting to learn, and being a former staffer, man, I got to tell you, I thought I had a lot of this stuff figured out, but there was a lot to learn. So when we vote up in the assembly, there's buttons. There's a green button and there's a red button.
Right.
And the first vote I had to take, my buttons weren't working. And I'm sitting there, I'm hitting it. I couldn't figure it out until my seatmate, Marie Waldron, leans over and she goes, "Oh, you need to put your key in. There's a little key that's in your desk. You have to turn your voting machine on to vote." So, I was learning on the fly. But I think the thing that blew my mind the most was first committee hearing I'm in, though. In the transportation committee, and I learned about this idea, this thing called a courtesy vote. So basically what happened was there's a member from LA presenting a bill, and it's sort of a benign bill. I think it basically says if you're riding your bicycle on a sidewalk and there's not a bike lane, you can't be cited for riding that bicycle on the sidewalk.
Okay.
And, I'm going to vote no on this bill. That is totally a local government decision. We do not need our state legislatures telling local communities where their bicycles can and cannot ride. That just seems ridiculous to me. But I'm not really paying attention because, it's a member of the majority party who's authoring the bill. It's an overwhelming, majority party on the committee. This thing's going to sail through.
Right.
Well, the chair of the committee, she throws up her microphone and she goes, "This is a bad bill." And I'm like, oh, okay, I'm paying attention. She goes, "In fact, if this bill passes, people will die. I lost a friend to this exact incident, was riding on the sidewalk, rode into an intersection. Motorists don't know to look for him, got hit by a car, got run over, and was killed.
Wow.
So with that, I'll be voting yes today." And I'm sitting there texting my staff, and I'm like, I got to be.
Wait, what?
Yeah. What did you just say? And so I asked about this later, and basically what happens is because we have so many bills through the legislature, 2,000 to 2,500 every year.
Jeez.
And you've got such a limited time frame.
Over 2,000 bills a year.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you believe there's any member of the state legislature, other than yourself, of course, who actually reads every single bill?
No, you can't.
Right.
You really can't. I mean, your staff can barely keep up with it. You've got, caucus staff, committee staff, and your own personal staff and yourself, and you're trying to get through all this. And that's why you get so many of these unintended consequences coming through, legislation that comes out of the state capitol. It used to be the committee process was designed to vet the bill. And so then if the chair had concerns about this bill, they would say to the author, "We really need to work on this because this is actually going to have a negative impact on public safety and the quality of life in our communities. You can take this back, continue to work on it, and then bring it back to the committee, and we'll give it a vote, and we'll move it forward at that point." They now do these courtesy votes where they just say, "Well, they're my friend. I've got a good relationship with them. They're going to have to vote on my bills. So let's just vote it through today." And, they'll give watching committee hearings is fascinating on these type of bills because they'll give these speeches about their reservations and how they hold their right to vote against this later on down the process when it's on the floor. But I trust the author and I know they're a good person. So I'll be voting yes today to move the bill forward.
Wow.
And I could recite this thing in my sleep now that I've heard the amount of people who give that speech, but it's just not the way to pass good policy. And so that was an eye-opening experience for me.
Oh, I bet. My gosh. Okay. So first time you walk out onto the assembly floor is it just like an awe-inspiring moment? You're in this historic building. First of all, the state capitol is beautiful.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, and the assembly chambers, you call it the chambers?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not chambers.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. We have an ongoing argument about whether it's a city council chamber or chambers. And I say that it's chambers.
I think it should be chamber.
Right.
Interesting.
Apparently the state legislature agrees with me. So you walk into the chambers, it's got to just be this kind of moment, just kind of, it has to be surreal.
It still is every time I walk out there, to be honest. Been only doing it for 2 years, but it's a pretty special feeling. And I think Jim Brulte was telling us that there's only been 4,500 people in the history of the state who have served in the legislature. So
wow,
you've got this great oil painting of Abraham Lincoln looking down on you, and it's a very cool experience.
Oh, I can imagine that. That's pretty neat.
Awesome.
Give us a day in the life of a member of the state legislature.
Well, Monday morning, I fly up at 7 a.m. So I leave the house around 5, fly up. My flight's at 7 out of Palm Springs. I will land around 8:30, go into the swing space now. So the Capitol is under construction. They've had the Capitol Annex is completely torn down, which is where all the members' offices used to be. And then there's a temporary building that they've got across the street where all of our offices are housed as they build new offices.
So I actually surprise visited you
Yes.
A year or so ago. I was in Sacramento for training. Part of our insurance, our Joint Powers Authority that we belong to for basically our insurance, called CIRA. And on a break, I came over and I had to find the building because it's not in the Capitol. It's a different building. But I have to say, as a member of the minority party, you made out with this deal because you have a very nice office. And it used to be in the Capitol that there were some really bad tiny offices, and the party and the majority would assign those offices to the minority party, and you would have had basically a closet. So you have a very nice office.
I know, I have a window and everything. It's great. Yeah. No, it's not too bad, but you'll so Mondays and Thursdays we have session. So you kind of get into the office, do a debrief with your staff on what the week ahead's going to look like. You'll have some meetings with stakeholders, and often it's a lobbyist and their clients, and they want to share some information on a bill. There's legislation that I would say overwhelmingly legislation is well-intentioned. But it's, like my background's in state government and campaigns. I'm being charged with making decisions on everything that, goes before the legislature. And I don't have the background or technical expertise to make those decisions. So having those experts come in and just sort of give you a day in the life of what's going on in their industry and how it would change if these. So you have a lot of those stakeholder meetings. You want to try and learn as much as you can about a bill. And then we'll go out on the floor at 1. We'll have floor session for a couple of hours. We'll do a couple committees usually. And then you've got all the folks like yourself, people from the district who are coming up for their associations, whether it's, realtors, insurance agents, whoever it is. And they've got kind of their evening meetings. And so you try and get around to as many of those as possible. It's always my approach to say, if you made the trip to come up to Sacramento to see the legislature, you're going to see your legislator. Like, I'm going to make time and figure out a way to work you into my calendar.
Oh, that's great.
And so you basically do that Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. On Tuesday and Wednesday, there's no floor session. It's just committee hearings all day. And then Thursday, you have floor session, and then you get to the airport and fly back home as soon as you can because you've got all these district events and district meetings, and you want to see the people you represent and make sure you didn't do anything too bad or you're getting yelled at too much.
And that sounds like extremely hectic.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah,
it's a lot.
And then you still got to be doing all the campaigns. You got to constantly be raising money, and with a 2-year cycle, it's constant, I imagine.
Yeah, no, I mean, those photos you were showing, I'm like, man, I've got all sorts of bags under my eyes and lines in my forehead now.
Well, someone was in my office recently, and I have a picture on my wall that was from an article when I first started here, which was just coming upon 2 years now. And they looked at the picture and they looked at me. I said, man, you got a lot more gray hair now. Jerk.
I wasn't going to comment on that, but you did.
So you have to maintain 2 residents, right? You got to have a place in Sacramento, and obviously you need to remain a resident of your district. How does that work?
Yeah, I actually do hotels up in Sacramento.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you can do whatever you want on that. I find that hotels make a little more sense just because I can fly up Monday morning and it's only 3 nights, right? Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday night.
Right.
So it doesn't make a whole lot of sense for me to keep a second residence up there, but some members do. Some members will, become roommates or.
Yeah, I think that's very common. I've heard about, it's kind of interesting. I think the average person doesn't think about their state legislators, having roommates, or sleeping on couches. It used to be, I think in Congress, members of Congress would sometimes sleep on the couch in their office.
I would if they'd let us. They actually intentionally didn't put showers into the swing space building to prevent people from doing that.
Don't let that stop you.
Yeah.
So you get the state doesn't pay for that though, right? The hotel, you get a stipend. Is that the way
you
it
get
works?
a per diem?
Per diem,
yeah, and that comes out of your per diem.
Okay, all right. So for I forget how many years now, the Republican Party has been in what's called a super minority, which correct me if I get this wrong, but it means that the Democratic Party in Sacramento has greater than a 2/3 majority. Is that right?
Yeah.
Which means that they have a majority large enough that they can pass pretty much anything without a single Republican vote.
That's correct.
Because some votes require 2/3.
2/3, yes.
Okay. What's that experience like? Is that frustrating in that it's much harder to accomplish legislative goals, or is it also kind of freeing because you don't really you get to fight for the things that you believe in without the burden of actually governing, right? I mean, what is that experience like?
Yeah, I mean, I think both sides are correct there. It's obviously extremely frustrating being in the super minority a majority of the time because you have conversations with members of the majority party off the floor, outside of the building, and you recognize that they know that these are bad ideas that we're passing, but there's no real opposition. There's not enough to stop it. And so what happens is, if you're in the majority party, you basically have to do what the speaker or the governor says. I remember when I first went up there 2 years ago, we had a special session on windfall profits from oil refiners, and the Democrat member from kind of Bakersfield, Central Valley area, she said that, this is a bad bill. It's only going to increase costs. I'm voting no. I'm voting with the Republicans. And literally the next day, the governor's office is calling her out on Twitter. She gets her office budget cut, her staff budget cut. She gets removed from her committees. So, from that token, it's great that I can go up here and actually represent my district. They expect me to speak out against the majority party. They expect me to go out there and say, hey, this is not a good idea. We need to view this from a different lens. I will say there are some procedural things that we've been able to use that have made us more impactful than our 18 strong should be. There's a process called a WARF. It stands for without reference to file. And so it's just a procedural motion to move a bill directly through the committee process for a full vote on the floor. It's an interesting, they're always going to get voted down, and technically it is just a procedural vote, but the way press will cover it oftentimes is Democrats voted to, or the majority party voted to, kill a bill that would have increased penalties against fentanyl dealers. Right. And that becomes a really hard thing for members of the majority party to go back home and defend. I mean, it's really hard to be like, yeah, I stood strong with the fentanyl dealers and defended them. Nobody wants to be the one saying that. And so we've put them in a position a couple of times, along with the public's input, that we've been able to actually force good policy to go through, which is kind of nice. But yeah, I'd say, the state would benefit a lot from more balance.
There are stories of, Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill duking it out during the day on policy. 5 o'clock comes around and they go get a drink together. Right. I think there's at least a perception that world is gone, and that things are so polarized that the two sides hate each other and they're constantly at each other's throats. What has been your experience? Is it in Sacramento? Is there kind of a camaraderie, a cordial nature to it off the floor where you can get along and socialize and be friends with the other side, or does that just not exist?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely how it is. And I can't speak to how it is back in DC, but up in Sacramento, I mean, I would consider 90% of the people in the assembly or senators friends.
That's great.
And we absolutely get together, have conversations. My favorite one is how we all recognize we need to reform CEQA, and yet we still don't do anything on it. But it's at least nice getting some of that validation. But having the ability to have sort of those high level conversations without the partisan lens is something that we can all do.
I think that's great. But at the end of the day, it comes down to what 2, 3, 4 people want, and everyone else has to toe that line. Is that?
Well, and that's what happens. I mean, and it's not partisan. I think if you asked the Tennessee legislature has a supermajority of Republicans, and I imagine it functions similar to how we do here. It's not great for democracy when you have one party making all the decisions. And in a state as diverse as California, I mean, look at my district, right? The needs of Yucaipa are going to be very different from the needs of Palm Springs.
Right.
Now you've got Sacramento trying to make one size fits all policy for a state as large as California with so many diverse interests. It's not the greatest way to do it. You need to have that give and take and some more balance and some more ideas and viewpoints represented.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Do you enjoy it?
Oh yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
You don't regret it?
No, not at all. No, I think it's great. I mean, it is the honor of my lifetime to be able to go up and represent our community in Sacramento. I think, Yucaipa, believe it or not, is the largest city in the district.
I know.
And I know that you would know that as the city manager of Yucaipa. But when I get up to Sacramento, all I hear about is Palm Springs. Well, Palm Springs is the 5th largest city by population in the district. And so I have to explain to them, well, this is actually the west side of my district. You've got Yucaipa over here. And it's really cool getting to share that with other lawmakers and other decision makers in Sacramento, how our needs are going to not necessarily fit whatever works for LA.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
So for anyone listening who might have ambition to get involved, run for office, throw their head, what advice would you give them? How would you recommend that they prepare themselves for that and get started?
I mean, I think it's relationships. Build as many relationships as you can. Get as involved as you possibly can with your community, whether that's going to political events or just regular community events. I guess I could say you could intern for Chris Mann. I did that. I don't know if you guys are accepting interns, but that was how I started. But yeah, no, I think it's a relationship thing, and you want to be able to, when you need to make that jump, have a nice Rolodex of folks you can call through that are going to have your back and support you and help get you going.
Yeah, that's great. Well, we're going to wrap it up today, but the message I want people to hear is local elections really do matter, right? In fact, in many ways, local elections impact our lives more directly on a day-to-day basis than I think what people often pay attention to, which is what's going on nationally or, to a lesser extent, at the state level, but our state and county and city special district elections, they really matter. So even if you're discouraged about, what your vote might mean on the national level, please make sure that your voice is heard by getting out and casting your vote. City Clerk Anna Sauseda, Assemblyman Greg Wallis, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Episode number 6 will drop in 2 weeks on Tuesday, November 19th, which is the week before Thanksgiving. And at that time, we will all give thanks that the election cycle is over. Thank you for watching and listening to Yucaipa 360.